Rental arbitrage. Is it worth the risk? Today on the Daily Ish Show.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, ignition, liftoff.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Daily Ish Show. Sorry, I'm having a brain cramp today. Welcome to the Daily Ish Show, a show not just for rental housing providers, but anybody looking to get a little bit more white space on your calendar. It is good to see you. Let's see if I've got. Okay, very good. I was worried about what was going to pop up there. I'm sharing a screen. I wasn't sure if it was going to share the front end or the back end. Anyway, I got to figure it out. It's good to see you all. Today we're talking about rental arbitrage and is it worth the risk? When I first came across this, I was thinking that this sounds like some sort of voodoo and it involves something I don't understand, so I'm out, right? Well, it was interesting. The other day I was watching a story about one of the co-founders of Airbnb, Nate Blasharczyk, who was recently on Bloomberg TV. And he was announcing that Airbnb had announced that they were entering into a strategic partnership with Starwood Capital Group. Now, Starwood Capital Group, if you don't know who they are, they were purchased by Marriott International back in, let's say, 2016. And that sounds right. If anybody knows different, tell me otherwise. But they are known for owning brands like Ritz-Carlton, Sheraton, Westin, but they are also one of the largest owners of market rate multifamily housing in the US. So, thus the reason Airbnb was very interested in having a strategic alliance with them, among other housing providers, to allow and encourage rental arbitrage in their housing units. So, for Marriott, which is in the hospitality business, to allow such an alliance to exist between Starwood and Airbnb is not only brilliant, but incredibly strategic. We'll talk about maybe that another time. But let's talk about what is rental arbitrage, because that seems to be a big question. Like, is this even something that if I have a rental property, is this something that I would want to allow? So let's talk about that. Rental arbitrage is when you have a tenant, for example, who is leasing a unit or sometimes maybe even a building and rents it to someone else while they, the tenant, still have rights to that unit. So let's say, for example, you have an owner named Bob. Let me make my screen a little bit bigger here. So Bob, there he is. Okay, there you go. So Bob owns a property and leases it to Susie. Now, Susie is the tenant. Susie is going to be traveling for the next 6 weeks and wants to make a little extra cheddar while she's gone to help pay for her trip. Enter Joe. Joe is going to be traveling to the city where Susie has her apartment and needs a place to hang his hat for a month, but doesn't want to stay in a hotel. So Susie engages in rental arbitrage. Susie advertises online, says she's looking for someone who is looking for a furnished short-term rental with all utilities included. And Joe then contacts her and she leases it to Joe. And Bob, the owner of the property, gets his normal rent and life is good. Now, many people think that rental arbitrage is a new thing or is something born out of the Airbnb industry, when in fact it's not. When I worked for Marriott in St. Louis as an assistant controller, Marriott didn't own that property. And in fact, Marriott doesn't own a lot of the properties that they actually that they actually rent to travelers. But it was owned by someone, or basically a large business, that Marriott paid rent to. And Marriott made money by renting out the individual rooms, again, a form of rental arbitrage. So what are the risks? Let's talk about the risks to the property owner first. So obviously the owner, in this case Bob, doesn't even know that Joe exists. And in this case, this could be a lease violation, right, for Susie, because especially if it's in her lease where it specifically states that she cannot engage in rental arbitrage or that no one else can live in the unit except her and maybe anyone else that's listed on the lease. So let's talk about potential damages to the property, which in my case, as a long-term landlord, I kind of worry about that. Or let's just face it, if they're even doing something in the property that disturbs the quiet enjoyment or use of the property. Now, while these are surely risks, keep in mind that if any of this, anything happens, it all falls back on the original resident, which in this case is Susie. So if anyone that she has in the property does something, it all is going to fall back on her. So the real risk is if that something happened that was really expensive or really egregious that the resident wouldn't somehow be able to pay for it. Keep in mind, these are all risks that can be mitigated by requiring insurance. So let's talk about the risks to Susie, the original resident. So there are, of course, risks to the tenant that are largely out of their control. Say, for example, that something breaks in the apartment and Bob, who's the owner or property manager, doesn't fix it very timely. Now, that could be a huge issue for Susie in her ranking as a host, which, from what I understand, that is a big, big deal in your rankings. So, some other things uh, that might come up is that Joe is just a complete jerk and does all sorts of damage to the property, but also her personal property. Stuff could get stolen, and she can get cleaned out, and she wouldn't even know until Joe has left town. Now, not to get in the weeds on all this, but a lot of these risks are minimal and can be mitigated. And I'll be honest with you, while I don't engage in this business in any way, not as an owner, not as a host, and I've only done it one time as a consumer, I'll be honest with you, it's just not my cup of tea. I do know a lot of people who do. And every person that I have talked to, they tell me pretty much uniformly that these sorts of things that happen are few and far between. So this begs the question, is this a good fit for you? Look, no matter where you land on this, I do think it's at least worth a look. I think if it's a good fit for you and your business and it helps to stabilize the rent in your area and it makes you more competitive, why not? Here's what I'm going to challenge you. Don't let this become a cognitive bias for you. In this case, it would be a status quo bias that prevents you from pivoting just because it's new and different and it's outside of the things that you normally do, right? And that's all I have for today, everybody. Please be sure to place a value on your free time because if you don't, someone else will. And most important, there is no amount of money that will make time irrelevant. Have a great rest of your day. We'll see you next time.